Evening.
How's everybody tonight? It is 6 o'clock Tuesday night.
It is.
Time for Think
Do you know
Differently
where your
Academy
children are?
Live. Our children are here at our feet.
If you know what that is, then
You're giving
you
away
are
your
old.
age officially.
Officially.
We've heard about it. Like we've heard other people talk about
Well,
it.
it's
So,
on like reruns and stuff.
and stuff like that. Yeah.
Reruns.
But if you guys know about it firsthand.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, well, we are well into our series on abuse in the culture. We've done so much teaching on the dynamic of abuse and what it's like to experience it, things to do about it, communication within the relationship of abuse. We wanted to kind of expand the picture and talk about abuse in the culture. So we've been talking about the cultural impact and the various responses from the culture around. And so tonight we will continue that. In a second, we'll talk about what tonight's topic is, though you can see it in wherever the...
But while you're looking for the topic, if you are on YouTube, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. And if you're on Facebook and you have not liked our Think Differently Academy page, go ahead and like it and follow.
Nice.
Yeah, and share.
And then we'll say hi to Dana.
Hi, Dana.
And
from
hi to
Callie.
Beth and Rose.
Beth and hi, Rose.
How are you guys?
Hope y'all are doing well.
So should we make sure it's on Think Differently Academy?
I can do
so
that.
we have typically up until tonight, to make sure that it was broadcasting on all three platforms, we had to go through these extreme gyrations to get it onto the Think Differently Academy page. Hello, Deborah. And
Deborah.
So Polly's just going to check real quick and make sure we actually are on Think Differently Academy. And if you're on there, I guess you can't really comment, can you?
No, that is the only issue, is that we cannot comment. Okay. It is not going. So I'm going to send this over to Jason.
Okay. So I'm going to continue talking. Polly is going to do the tech work for the night. So hello to Betty, also to Joyce from Delaware.
Hi, you guys.
Good to have you guys with us. And as I mentioned earlier, we're going to continue the conversation about abuse in the culture by talking about the cost and the difficulty for an abuse victim leaving abuse. And so I want to take a minute to repeat something I said last week that I have not been able to get out of my own brain. I said it to Polly at dinner, and I'm going to say it again to you guys tonight. I'll probably say it one more time, if not 3 more times before the series is over. But last week, as we were talking, I had this realization that, I think our second week, we talked about grooming. Yes. But in the meantime, the whole idea is that if abuse is fundamentally the inappropriate assignment or transfer of responsibility, the abuser transfers responsibility to the victim. Listen to this sequence. So grooming is the question, will you accept responsibility if I give it to you? Abuse is the movement that takes place once the groomer has realized that the person will, whether through pressure, coercion, or physical threat, whatever it might be. So abuse is that inappropriate assignment of responsibility, whether sexually, physically, emotionally, psychologically, those kind of things. And then when we talk about, last time we talked about gaslighting is the guarantee or the kind of cement that keeps you taking responsibility, because you're not saying that's wrong. You're saying, wait a minute, that's what I thought it was, but you're telling me that's not what I thought it was. And a reasonable person will think things through before they just insist. So gaslighting is kind of the cement that keeps us taking responsibility. And then the smear campaign, which we'll talk some about tonight, the smear campaign is the abuse or the transfer of responsibility that takes place after the abuse. And so you've got both pre, during, and post-abuse transfer of responsibility. So as we talk through tonight, this idea that, and I think I put this in the description, the only thing more costly than leaving abuse is staying in an abusive relationship. And so there comes a moment for every abuse victim, which I'm going to describe that again because that's a part of the setup. But there comes a moment for every abuse victim where the scale, the balance of cost tips enough that they painfully decide, I'm going to do the second most costly thing because I can no longer pay the cost that I've been paying to stay in this relationship. And what I mean by, I'm going to explain that in a minute, is in the very first of the series, when we talk about the abuser dynamic, one of the things we describe is that the abuse victim does not typically think of themselves as an abuse victim. They think of themselves as a special helper with a certain set of skills or characteristics that if they can just get it right, their abuser will become the amazing, wonderful person that they just are convinced that they are.
Yeah.
In the same way, an abuser doesn't think of themselves as an abuser. They think of themselves as somebody who has no problem or a minimal problem. And their problem is that other person who either provokes them in some way that they look like they have a problem, or won't do certain things, that so the abuser does certain things to get things from them. And so they see the other person as the problem. And in many cases, they see themselves as being controlled or see themselves as being abused.
Mm-hmm.
And so often that abuse dynamic is invisible, because in that transfer of responsibility, the abuser feels the victim is responsible for the problem. The victim is trying to get the other person to change by doing all the things that they ask, doing all the things that they believe will make a difference.
Yeah.
And in that dynamic between the two, there's kind of this painful, and I've often said covert agreement. Now, somebody pushed back on me to say children don't make a covert agreement when they're abused, and they're right on to say that. By the time we're adults in a relationship where abuse is taking place, there's kind of this unspoken, I want to stay in this to try to make things okay with you. And the other person saying, I want to stay in this because I'm getting a benefit from it. And well, the abuse victim is not getting a benefit. They believe so much in their abuser that they invest beyond what's safe or reasonable.
Right.
And so when I talk about the abuse victim, finally the scales tip, or finally the scales come off their eyes. It's always about the scales, right? Finally the scales tip, and the price that they've been paying becomes too much. That exchange of resource for deficit. The abuse victim is giving emotional resource, while the abuser is asking the abuse victim to carry their deficit. That exchange of resource for deficit becomes too much for the victim to bear, and they're almost always the ones that either go for help or take the first step to leave. And so that's kind of the thing that's going on behind the scenes. Sometimes it's a year, sometimes it's years and years, sometimes it's decades that this dynamic just goes on with the exchange of responsibility or the exchange of resource versus deficit. And the abuse victim is just kind of their ability to carry the weight diminishes with their emotional stamina, their resiliency, and finally, even, it takes a wear on their well-being because they're giving away more and more of themselves.
Yeah.
You look like you're about to say something.
Yeah, I was just reading. Yeah.
Okay. And so what you see is there's almost always kind of drawing nearer and nearer and nearer to this point of leaving, but almost always the abuse victim feels trapped for a number of reasons. And I want to say almost every, if not every abuse victim that I've communicated with would say something like this: it feels like a violation of my own values to leave.
Yeah.
Now, that may not be the language that they use, but they feel like they are somehow obligated morally, ethically. It's their mission in life. There's something about themselves that they feel like they'll be betraying their own values to get out of the abusive situation. Why? Because they see themselves as a special helper. And to give up on helping the other person to them seems like they're somehow giving up on, somebody they've invested their entire life on. The difficulty is the other person has given up a long time ago. And so once again, it's that transfer of responsibility, because the abuse victim feels like they're giving up when the other person never invested a resource. They only invested their deficits. And so that kind of growing movement towards that becomes, heavier and heavier. The abuse victim starts complaining more, starts kind of turning up their emotional intensity, but they're also growing in awareness that if I start making the move to leave, there's another set of costs that I'm going to pay. And that's what we want to talk about tonight.
Yeah.
I also want to say on the front end, because a lot of times this becomes an afterthought, and you're always good to remind me in this, even though you don't know what I'm about to say.
No.
But
remind me.
In the case of physical abuse,
in
the case where the abuse has become physical and it's physical violence is taking place, it's important that you understand the most dangerous time for a victim of physical abuse is when they decide or try to decide to leave. The physical abuser will so ramp up their physical abuse, because that's their way of maintaining control, that whenever physical abuse turns lethal, I don't have the percentages in front of me, but I believe it's in the 90%, 90+%. That the times that when a physical abuse victim is murdered It takes place at the point where they've decided to leave or where they've left already and the abuser stalks them and kills them. And so we want to say ahead of time, if the situation that you're in involves physical abuse, and by the way, sometimes people don't even realize when they're being physically abused.
Right.
Being grabbed and shaken, being pushed against a wall. Anytime somebody uses their physical size or strength,
throwing things at you.
So it actually could be someone half your size. It could be, a woman, 110 pounds,
Yeah.
using physical things like throwing things, picking up weapons, those kind of things, in some way, making a physical threat.
I would say even if they've never laid a hand on you before, but they like aggressively like get in your face, they might like rev their car towards you, the edge of physical violence, I would say that is physical abuse too, because your body responds as if it's truly physical. And so those are just as dangerous situations. Like, he never laid a hand on me, and then one day he snaps. And so, or she, vice versa.
Blocking a door so you
blocking
can't
a
leave.
door. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So
all those things that are physical, even when it's an impedance to movement. And the thing about that is those kind of things always escalate until it's over.
Right.
Whatever that means. And so we want to be specific to say, if you're in a situation where physical violence is a part of the dynamic, please get help in leaving.
Yes.
It's a very different process in the sense that you're in physical danger, potentially life and death sort of danger. And so there are people who are skilled and trained at helping people get out of those physically violent relationships. And you need the protection of you've got to make a plan. You've got to do all the things necessary to protect not only you, but in many cases, children. And it's just important to get real guidance from people who have experience in that. To try to leave a physically abusive relationship without some guidance makes it that much more dangerous. Again, that's the most dangerous time, and the most common time when someone is murdered is when they're either getting ready to, or they already have left a physically violent relationship. So most of what we'll say tonight really has more to do with relationships where it's emotional, psychological, or other types of abuse that don't involve physical violence. At the same time, physical violence always has these other elements as well.
Right.
So here's the thing you've got to realize. If the process has moved from grooming into abuse and included gaslighting, as we've talked about last time, gaslighting isn't just about the abuse victim.
Right.
The abuser gaslights the entire community, whether that's friends, even family, often family. Someone had asked last week is, sometimes does family become the flying monkeys? And if the abuser has been gaslighting the entire system, family, friends, culture, faith community, whatever it might be, then the abuse victim knows this very clearly. If I make a move to leave, I may end up alone.
Yeah.
And all those people are likely to support the abusive person. For those who are in religious communities, they may end up not only alone, but without that community, and perhaps without even roles that they've played in that community. And so that awareness that the cost they're going to pay is often as prohibitive of leaving as is the dynamic itself, where they feel like they're giving up on something. Another one of our watchers had made the point that not only do people feel like they're a special helper, but often religious communities make people feel like you're obligated to stay because of kind of that religious mandate that says, God hates divorce. And by the way, I highly recommend Gretchen Baskerville's book, The Life-Saving Divorce. Not only is she a biblical scholar, but she does her homework also in the area of abuse and the abuse dynamic.
And just lots of information and statistics about what's it going to do to my kids? What's it going to do to, all of that. She gives incredible statistics. So it's a brilliant book.
And she does a great job of revisiting Malachi 3 that many people read as God hates divorce, which was only translated that way in recent years. For centuries, it was translated as God hates the treatment that leads to divorce. Now, I'm oversimplifying, and that's why I recommend her book. But understand that, Gretchen's done a great job of really addressing all the key biblical issues as well as the kind of sociological issues. Like Polly said, all the statistics about, we have this belief that getting out of a marriage is going to harm our kids. The reality, again, she'll give you the stats on this, but the reality of that is that Getting out of a marriage that's safe and happy may be harmful to the kids, but in many cases, leaving a marriage that's abusive is actually better for the kids than staying in it and allowing the abuse to continue. So if you're in that situation now, Gretchen Baskerville's book, The Life-Saving Divorce, a key resource.
Even if you're not in that situation and you have views that like, gosh, I don't understand why people get divorced, all of that kind of stuff. Just read it for information to understand and have a different viewpoint.
Yeah, super helpful.
Yeah, think differently about that.
About all that, about both the sociological and biblical issues involved in that.
Exactly.
So you've got two factors that we've talked about so far. And one of them is that often there's kind of an internal drive that says, I'm betraying myself or I'm betraying a high value that I genuinely hold to get out. And there's probably no greater obstacle than your own sense of value.
Yeah.
I think one of the most frustrating things that we hear all the time, and you probably have too, and that is that so many people say, people just give up on marriage too easily. The reality is there may be a few people out there who give up on it easily.
Yeah.
But I think the people we're talking to and talking about have fought and fought and fought because they so believe in not only the institution of marriage, but in many cases they believe in their partner. And frustratingly, they believe in their partner long beyond the point where evidence would support that belief, because that internal drive says, but surely they'll change. Surely someday they'll get over this. Surely someday they'll be better. One of the things I think is so important to hear, if you're in that situation, you're still in a marriage that's like that, and you're saying to yourself, surely he or surely she will change. Listen to me for a minute. If you can resolve the issue that God is not specifically opposed to divorce, and I know that's a giant leap, depending on what all you've heard and read, read Gretchen's book, and maybe that can help you see all the different passages that if God is not specifically opposed to divorce, then the next issue that pops up is, well, I can't leave because what if he or she changes? What if I leave and they change a month from now?
Yeah.
I want you to hear this. Somebody who was willing to treat you this way over a long passage of time, even if they do change, you have the right to get out of a relationship where somebody has treated you as so lacking of value and so invisibly that they're willing to continue to treat you that way in spite of your requests, your insistence, in many cases begging and pleading, in many cases counsel from other professionals or pastors. If they've been willing to treat you that way, you have the right to get out simply because some person was willing to do that to you over time in spite of your request for relief and reprieve. If they change, that's on them. You have no obligation to stay. We should also talk about the issue of forgiveness.
Yeah, for sure.
Right
now, or?
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to go to that thing too, is if you wrestle with this and you're like, okay, one of the things is, how do I say, I'm trying to figure out how to say it. You actually honor them by, it's like, I'm no longer going to let you operate out of a false version of yourself where you believe that you're okay harming me in this relationship. So I'm actually going to honor you and release you from that, so you can now step into who you're created to be and release them and let them go, so you can then become true to who you are and heal in the best way possible. And I hope that came out right.
Yeah.
Because we can get stuck in that, like, gosh, what if they do change and all that kind of stuff. And it's like in this cycle, like Bob said, if they're okay to keep harming you and keep this pattern going, then you can release them to no longer operate out of their false version. And you are not responsible for changing that. So let's take on
Polly made a super important point in that. She talked about the cycle, and keep in mind that the cycle, while you're still in it, if you only examine it behaviorally, there's moments of behavioral abuse and there's moments where they change the behavior but haven't changed the underlying dynamic of misassignment of responsibility. And so a lot of times that what if they change question is based on that cycle with I've seen glimmers of hope, when really what you've seen is a continuing cycle that just goes back and forth between the behavioral abuse and the season without the behavioral abuse, but still the misassignment
A
of
behavioral
responsibility.
change, like what looks like change.
Right.
But if it goes back to abuse, then change never happened. It was modification.
Right. And it is modification of behavior. Inwardly, they still believe you are responsible and they have no problem. And so the reason I say that is, let's say that you decide to leave and a year later you're going, oh, look, they changed. Odds are slim. And I don't mean to be, look, I'm a counselor. I believe in change. I believe anybody and everybody can change. But when you hear us talk a little bit about the smear campaign, part of the smear campaign is that they will talk about how you finally made the big change and that you weren't forgiving. They finally really paid the price to become, sober, or to become, no longer abusive, but you were just hard-hearted and unwilling to forgive. And so part of that smear campaign is the extended time where they're like, look how good I'm doing. They gave up on me. And so that'll transition us to the talk on forgiveness. But I want you to hear that 3 years later, they're going to advertise to the world, look how I've changed. And that's because that's part of the, 3 years later transfer of responsibility.
Or actually, they were probably the problem, because now I no longer have an issue with anger.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just real quick, one of the things that if you've been in this dynamic or just kind of in the big cultural look, and then we'll talk about forgiveness, I promise, because it's really important, is that a lot of times the victim plays a role in making the abuser look really good.
It's a good way to say that.
And so, it is, you protect the image of the family
as that special helper.
Because as that special helper, it's like, we don't have a problem. We look great. We put a smile on. Our kids are clean most days. It's
make
like
excuses for them.
You make excuses for them. You cover for them. Yeah, you do all of the things.
In some cases, you make excuses to the kids about them.
Right. So you end up protecting their image. And so in this image protection, that when all of a sudden you change and say, I can no longer do this, then everybody has an image that the abuser tries to portray, but then but what do you mean? Your family looked amazing.
Right.
Like, what's wrong with you because you made this family, this family looked perfect. So obviously you leaving, there's something wrong. So the culture has this picture of what you have helped create to make something that was very toxic in the home look really good on the outside.
Yeah, there's just amazing dynamics. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's a defense mechanism, and it is this like, okay, we've got it together and we're going to be okay, right? We got to look good, because maybe if I do that, it's going to look good in the home.
It'll eventually be good.
And so that whole special helper, it's like this big role that makes this abuser look great on the outside to the world.
Yeah, there's this amazing dynamic, and I think we just posted it on social media in the last few days, that when you're at your least healthy as a victim and you're enabling the abuser, you're covering for them, you're struggling every day but putting a strong face to the world, and you're your least healthy, people will trust you. When you start to become healthy and set boundaries and call abuse and stand against the other person's behavior and call things for what they are and really be honest about things, people will increasingly mistrust you because the abuser has set the stage for that. Whether they've played on the sympathies of everybody else, or whether they've played on the, the belief that everybody else, they're such a good person, they've never abused me, whatever it is, they've set the stage so that when you start to get healthy and call things as they are, that's the time when people start to mistrust you. Oh, look how hard-hearted you are. Look how unforgiving you are. Look how judgmental you are. How come he's doing all the work? How come you're not doing the work? Or she's doing all the work. How come you're not doing the work? And so because the gaslighting has been cultural and not just individual, when the victim starts to stand up and no longer play the special helper and expect the other person to be responsible, they're viewed as unforgiving. So now let's talk about forgiveness.
Yes. So one of the things that happens is like, okay, I want to talk about something else, but I want to talk about forgiveness. So we're going to talk about forgiveness because I have another thought. But forgiveness is really important in this process because in this, in the culture, the victim loses so much. Not always, but the majority of times when the victim finally says, no more, I am done, I am removing myself, and I am willing to lose everything to be okay. And so you make that step, and whatever it looks like, a lot of times the victim goes silent, and because the victim has gone silent, everybody else thinks that you're the problem and you tuck away. And so, but the abuser's like, oh my gosh, looking for all of this. So they're getting fed while you're like here licking.
Hurt. I'm so sad.
You're licking, so much. Right. And you're here licking your wounds. And I have heard people over and over again, like hell will I ever forgive my abuser. Like, no way. He does not deserve it. And I'd actually say, you know what? Or she, you know what? They don't deserve it. They don't. But you do. Because forgiveness isn't about them. Forgiveness is for you. It's a gift for you. It's a gift that you no longer, when you forgive, you no longer have to carry the poison of what and how this person has harmed you. You get to release them. You pull them out of you and you release them to the Lord. If you don't want to release them to the Lord, you can just kind of like release them because
into the wild.
Into the wild is that I choose to forgive ... Today I choose to do that, and I hand this person over because I'm no longer going to carry this person's pain, this person's evil, and this person's harm in me. And it is a gift for you to release this person in forgiveness.
Yeah. I always say forgiveness gives back the real estate that they've been occupying in our head.
Yes.
So, the longer we've been injured by them and the more deeply we've been injured, we've given them real estate rent-free inside our head.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we wonder, why is it so difficult to control our own thoughts? Maybe because we've given our thoughts over to somebody else by letting them rent space up here. And so forgiveness is me saying, I'm not going to, I'm going to live with what you've done, but not hold it against you. That's now between you and God. And trust that God will be the one who brings justice. Here's the difficulty. For everything we've been saying, there's a cultural problem with this, and that is that the outsiders will say, if you truly forgive, you would take him back. Or why are you so unforgiving? Because you're setting boundaries and enforcing distance and consequences. And this demand from others that your forgiveness should look a certain way really makes forgiveness about the abuser, which is not what it is. That's why Polly said first that it's really about your freedom and your healing. But the culture will often say you're not forgiving because you've set up a boundary and you're not letting down, because you've asked them to take responsibility and you're not giving an inch. And when you finally get healthy, other people will say you're not forgiving, or why won't you forgive, or you need to forgive. Listen carefully. In that sense, forgiveness is not at all about dealing with an ongoing harmful pattern.
That's right.
Forgiveness is how we free ourselves from the pain of the past. But how we free ourselves from the pain of the present and the future is with boundaries and consequences. If you continue to treat me that way, this is what I'm going to do about it. If you continue to be harmful to me, I'm going to create the distance I need to stay safe. If you continue to do these things that are painful or disruptive to my well-being, I'm going to do whatever I need to be safe in your unwillingness to adjust to what will protect me. And so we set a boundary. Others will say, oh, you're so unforgiving. And the reality is you're simply asking the dynamic of abuse, the transfer of responsibility, to return to a healthy one where each person is responsible for themselves.
Yes. And what a gift. What a gift. Yeah.
For your own well-being, for a healthy relationship.
For your kids, for your family, for every person that you then come in contact with after that. And, if somebody says, well, if you forgave them, why are you not communicating with them? You need to forgive because that's what you have to do. And you can ask the question back. It's so tell me what you think forgiveness is, because I know that forgiveness does not mean reconciliation. Forgiveness does not mean I'm a doormat. Forgiveness does not mean I am not allowed to set boundaries.
Exactly.
Forgiveness is something between me and the Lord, that I get to experience freedom and peace and healing, that I no longer have to carry that other person's pain.
And it allows me to set those boundaries out of love instead of anger.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Love would lead us to protect our own well-being. And like we said, to honor the other person by no longer allowing them to treat you that way, mm-hmm. no longer allowing them to be somebody other than who they really are in your orbit. Mm-hmm. And so you still set boundaries, but it comes out of a different place in your own soul when you've been able to find the healing from the things that they've done to you.
So just real quick, the reason why I say ask a question back, tell me what you believe about forgiveness. If you are able, like within this culture, if you are able to have a conversation with somebody that goes, wow, I've never thought about forgiveness that way. Let's talk about that. But if they're adamant and saying, absolutely not, Jesus forgave, you have to forgive like Jesus. And if it's a threat, then you might now be, more than likely, within the culture, an abusive culture.
Yeah.
And you will need to watch and look for the responses of the people that you have contact with. And if they are outside threatening and saying, you have to do this, you should do this, even counselors will say, you don't have enough faith. Have you prayed hard enough? You need to forgive more. If that's happening, then step back, look at the picture and go, sounds like I am navigating and experiencing a very abusive culture.
Let me speak just briefly as a licensed marriage and family therapist for 30 years. And Polly just mentioned, if you're getting a certain kind of counsel, as somebody who's been licensed for 30 years in the state of Texas, I just want to say, if you're getting counsel that tells you to go back into an abusive relationship and accept responsibility for their behavior, you are not getting good counsel. Mm-hmm. Whether it's coming from a religious counselor or coming from a secular counselor, the advice to go back into an abusive situation and accept responsibility for helping that person change mm-hmm. is 100%, 180 degrees opposite of what will be good for the other person and what will be safe for you. Mm-hmm. That counsel is baloney, as I once said on a video and got in a certain amount of trouble for saying a different word.
You're not in trouble.
Yeah, well, from two people.
That's not in trouble.
That's not trouble.
No.
Anyway,
so ask for forgiveness.
So the last thing we want to say is this. If you are about to, or have already made the decision to leave, everything changes. Yeah. The most unfair and difficult and painful part, I think, of abuse is that in a situation that you didn't choose, you then have to choose. And the choice is either to continue to be abused or to leave and potentially lose many valuable relationships and much of your support system. It's devastating. And I wish I had better news than that. But I will tell you this. On the front end, so many people say, I didn't know that these people would abandon me. I didn't know that I'd lose so many friends. But years later, years into the process, we hear again and again people say, I found out who my real friends were, mm-hmm. and it shocked me, but what a relief to know who my real friends are. And then the next thing we hear is, I've found a community of people who mm-hmm. actually see the things I saw and have experienced it. And the need for people who've gotten out of abusive relationships to provide support to one another is massive. Yeah. Gretchen's page, the Life-Saving Divorce page, is an incredibly helpful support system. Natalie Hoffman's page, Flying Free Sisterhood, mm-hmm. again, an incredibly helpful support system. Our website is not specifically designed as a support system for abuse survivors, but
it will give you the tools and help you heal whatever you're going through.
But the loss is devastating, and we don't want to undersell that. We don't want to minimize that, because that's probably the most shocking thing. Even though some part of the victim recognizes it's likely, when it happens, it's heartbreaking. Yeah. Find the people who are still your friends, and don't hide, don't run away, don't become isolated. Find the people who are still your friends. Mm-hmm. Find some new friends who understand. Find some people who can understand what happened and can recognize what you're going through. Don't be alone.
And I will say, if you are terrified to leave because of what you'll lose so much more of yourself by staying.
Yeah. It's an incredibly unfair decision, but what Polly said is the reason to get out. There, for most people, there comes a point where they say, yeah, I can't pay this price anymore.
Yeah.
So I've been a counselor for 30 years. I think in 2 situations, I would say that I saw the abuser change.
Yeah.
And that's out of hundreds and hundreds. Here's the difficulty. When I say that, you are going to think, well, then mine will be one of those 2. It might be. And one of the things we know is nobody else can tell you when it's time.
Yeah.
You'll have friends who say, never leave. You'll have friends who say, why have you stayed so long? No one else can tell you when it's time. But when it's time, know that you'll pay a price, but know that it's a price that someday you'll get a greater reward than you possibly could have if you'd have stayed. So we just wanted to come on and say, listen, we didn't talk much about the smear campaign.
Oh, yeah.
I guess I just want to say real quickly, I heard it said this way, and I just think it covers most of it. Once the abuser realizes they can't control you, they will then try to control the narrative. In other words, if they can't control you anymore, they'll try to make sure that they're the first one to talk. They're the first one to tell the friends. They're the first one to tell the church leaders. They're the first one to tell the kids, the family. They want to be the first ones because if they can no longer control you, they will do everything they can to control the narrative. The smear campaign is their way to continue to put the responsibility on you, even when you've gotten out of the relationship.
Yeah.
And another reason why it's so devastating is because that's, in many cases, a part of that. I think next week we're going to talk about personality disorders.
Okay.
And personality disorders, right? It's an important part of understanding.
Yeah.
Not all abusers are personality disordered, and not all personality disordered people abuse, but there's such a tie between the two. I want to take some time next week to talk about them from a clinical perspective, but also from kind of a helpful, kind of popularly understood perspective, so you can understand what it means to have a personality disorder, why that matters, and how that's connected to abuse.
Yeah.
So
awesome.
So thank you guys for being with us again.
Yes. If you're on YouTube, hit subscribe. If you're on Facebook and you haven't liked our TD Acad page, hit like and follow. And if you're on our Think Differently Academy page and you are on our on the silver subscription, be sure to bump up to the gold subscription because you'll get all of the Freedom Pathway and a really fun community. And so
you can get a 30-day free trial.
Yeah, you can get a 30-day free trial on tdacad.com. So we are glad you joined us tonight, and we will see y'all next week as we continue this conversation.
All right, see you guys next week.
Good night. Bye-bye.